The night before giving birth to her triplets, Lila received a text that shattered her world. "I can't do this anymore." No warning, no goodbye, just silence. From the man she thought would love her forever. She walked into the delivery room alone. No husband, no hand to hold, just a heart full of questions and 3 innocent lives about to arrive into a world of broken promises. Would you ever trust again? If the man who stayed was a stranger who saw your pain and chose to stay when even blood turned away. Hello, my beautiful family. You're all blessed this new week. In case you're new here and haven't subscribed, here at Love and Twilights we bring you the best love stories in the world. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any story. Now, let's begin. The bright overhead lights of Northside Medical Center flickered faintly as Lila Monroe stood frozen outside the maternity wing. Her hands trembled against the cool metal of the double doors, her fingertips clenched around the phone that had just delivered her final heartbreak. A message, just 13 words. "I'm sorry, Lila. I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me." That was it. No name, no call, no explanation, just silence and a hole in her heart where trust used to live. Just hours ago, she had been folding onesies and humming lullabies in their apartment while imagining the way her husband would hold their children. Now, on the precipice of motherhood, the man who had once whispered promises into her hair had vanished, taking with him the illusion of security and every dream they had shared. Lila's breath hitched, but she didn't cry. There wasn't time. The pain would have to wait. She pressed forward into the delivery room as the nurse called her name, the contractions already seizing her body in waves of intensity. Her heart screamed, not just from the physical agony but from the sharp realization that she was truly, undeniably alone. "Deep breaths, Lila. You've got this," a nurse whispered, mistaking the glint in Lila's eyes for fear of labor, not grief. Inside the sterile room, the beeping of monitors set the tempo of heartbreak. Lila's back arched with the effort of pushing, sweat lining her brow as she bore down into the pain. The staff offered encouragement, soft words that barely pierced the haze. And then, through the blur of pain and heartbreak, life cried out. "Here she is," the nurse cooed, lifting a tiny body swaddled in soft white. "Your daughter." Lila blinked back tears as they placed the first baby in her arms. Evie, the name she and Grant had chosen together in their happiest days. Another contraction came. Another scream. "Here's your boy. Strong lungs on this one." Max arrived, full of fire and sound, his fists clenched, his cry bold. And just when she thought she had nothing left, Isla was born, quiet, wide-eyed and peaceful, as though she sensed the storm from which she had emerged. Lila looked at the 3 of them, Evie, Max, Ela, and felt something primal take root. A fierce love, a desperate need to protect, a promise born of pain. No matter what, she would never abandon them. Tears finally fell, warm and silent, as the nurse gently wiped her brow. That's when she noticed it. Sitting quietly on the table beside her hospital bed was a single white gardenia in a delicate glass vase. There was no card. No nurse remembered placing it there. Its petals were fresh, unblemished, glowing softly under the fluorescent lights. It didn't belong in this sterile place, but neither did betrayal, and neither did Lila's quiet resilience. She reached for the flower with trembling fingers. In its fragile bloom, she saw a reflection of herself, bruised, maybe, but still whole. Still blooming. 6 hours later, in the recovery room, the babies lay tucked in their clear bassinets, each of them a mirror to her heart. Lila sat propped against pillows, sipping lukewarm tea while staring at the city skyline outside the window. The world moved on, oblivious to the tectonic shift that had just taken place inside her. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her landlord about rent. Nothing from Grant. The nurse peeked in, gently suggesting rest. But how could she sleep when the weight of an entire future now rested solely on her shoulders? Lila turned to her sketchpad instead. Her fingers moved from memory, sketching the curve of Evie's nose, the wild crown of Max's hair, Isla's impossibly serene expression. Each line gave her purpose, each stroke a declaration that she would endure. The white gardenia sat silently at the edge of the table, its petals catching the fading light. She kept glancing at it. Who had left it? And why? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe, like her children, it had arrived in the middle of chaos to remind her that beauty could still survive devastation. Bundled in soft blankets, the triplets were wheeled toward the hospital doors in a bassinet stroller. Lila, tired but standing, signed the discharge papers with hands that barely stopped trembling. She hadn't heard from Grant. Not once. As she stepped outside, a bitter wind cut through her coat. The world felt colder now, harsher. But in her arms was warmth, 3 fragile lives that had chosen her. That needed her. A volunteer helped her into the rideshare car she had ordered, with the last bit of money left in her checking account. As she buckled the car seat straps and whispered promises of protection into her children's ears, the driver glanced in the rearview mirror and asked, "You okay, miss?" Lila gave a soft nod. "Yeah. I will be back at home." Their apartment looked different now, emptier. No more Grant. No trace of him. She had removed his photo from the mantel. The crib he had assembled was now just wood and memory. Still, she moved forward. She fed, rocked, sang, cleaned. Her days were filled with tiny tasks that left no time for sorrow. Her nights were long, sleepless stretches of worry and lullabies, but through it all, the white gardenia remained. She had placed it in a makeshift shrine beside her bed, a reminder of the moment her world broke and how she had survived. On the 7th night after their birth, Lila stood beside the crib, watching her babies sleep. Her body ached, and the silence of the night pressed down on her like a weight. She turned to the flower again. Its petals had begun to wilt, but they still held form, just like her. She whispered into the dark, "You were born from pain, but I swear, you'll be raised in love." To every woman who's ever had to find her strength in solitude, to every soul who's rebuilt from ruin, this story is for you. Dawn broke not with promise, but with duty. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, swaddling Max with practiced grace while Isla cooed softly in the bassinet beside her. Evie stirred in her sleep, a tiny fist raised above her blanket as if protesting another cold morning. The studio apartment was dim and cramped, littered with diapers, burp cloths, and half-finished paintings leaning against the wall like forgotten dreams. Gone were the luxurious breakfast spreads Grant once Instagrammed. In their place, Lila nursed a lukewarm mug of instant coffee and a bowl of oats she didn't have the appetite to finish. She'd already changed 4 diapers before the clock struck 7 a.m., yet in this weary rhythm, a quiet power was building. She moved like a woman possessed, not by rage or sorrow, but by the need to survive. Her life now ticked to the sound of baby cries and microwave beeps. Everything was scheduled: feedings, naps, bottle washings, bills. There was no room for collapse. Every now and then, though, as the triplets napped or played with dangling toys, she'd retreat to her canvas. That corner of the apartment, paint-splattered, chaotic, was the only space where she could still breathe like Lila, not just Mom. Today she worked on a piece titled "A New Sun." Soft pinks, hazy golds, a skyline waking up. The strokes weren't perfect, but they were real. Every dab of paint whispered a truth she hadn't dared to speak aloud. She was still here, still creating, still dreaming. Later that afternoon, rain tapped gently on the glass as the triplets slept in their respective bassinets, their little bodies bundled like blossoms. Lila stood by the window, watching the city blur in the gray drizzle. She pressed her palm to the cool pane, her reflection faint but unmistakably changed. She no longer saw the woman who had once beamed beside Grant at corporate galas or smiled through dinner parties. That version of herself had been chipped away, one disappointment at a time. Now she was bare, raw, but somehow more real than she had ever been. On the shelf above her dresser sat the white gardenia, dried but intact, now nestled beside a faded photograph. Lila, younger and brighter-eyed, holding a brush with a carefree grin. She picked it up and stared at it for a long moment. "I miss her," she whispered, but even as the tears threatened, she straightened her back. That girl hadn't disappeared. She had simply grown into a woman who no longer measured her worth by someone else's gaze. Dinner was simple: soft rice and mashed carrots, spooned lovingly to 3 tiny mouths. Lila sang softly between bites, an old lullaby her grandmother once hummed during storms. As she cleaned up, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her breath caught. She stared at it for 3 long rings before answering. "Hello?" A long pause. Then a voice, low and familiar. "Lila, it's me, Grant." Her grip on the spoon tightened. "I just wanted to know how you're doing. I've been thinking about you. The kids..." There was no warmth in his words, just discomfort masquerading as concern. "You don't get to ask about us," Lila said quietly. Not anymore. I know I hurt you. I was scared. We all were. The difference is I didn't run." Another silence. "Is there anything I can do now?" he asked. Lila looked over at the triplets, Evie nuzzling into her blanket, Max sucking his thumb, Isla staring up at the ceiling as if deciphering the meaning of stars. "You can hang up," she replied, then did so before he could. Her heart pounded, but she didn't cry. Not this time. That night, a loud thunderclap startled the babies awake. Lila moved quickly, scooping Isla first, then Max, then Evie. Rocking them gently, she hummed their favorite lullaby until their cries softened. Her arms were sore, her back ached, and her eyes burned with fatigue. But her soul was standing taller than ever. As she settled them back into their bassinets, her eyes drifted once more to the gardenia. She approached it, touched its delicate petals, and whispered a vow. "I don't know who left you, or why, but you've reminded me that something gentle can survive anything." At 3 a.m., with the storm now distant thunder, Lila stood before her canvas again. The painting had evolved from a sunrise into something else entirely, a mother holding 3 children, not in triumph, but in fierce resolve. There was exhaustion in the posture, but also grace. It was beautiful, in the way only something born from struggle could be. She signed her name at the bottom, for the first time in months. A full signature, no initials, no shame. And for a brief moment, she allowed herself to smile. Have you ever rebuilt yourself from scratch? Have you found beauty in the middle of your worst season? Drop a thought in the comments to share your strength with someone who might need it. And if this chapter touched your heart, show some love. Hit like, share with someone rebuilding their life, and don't forget to subscribe to Love in Twilights. Your support gives voice to stories that matter. It began with a cough, not from Lila, not from Isla or Max, but from Evie. A faint, dry rasp the night before had grown into shallow wheezing by morning. Lila pressed her palm to her daughter's forehead and felt heat that unsettled her down to her spine. Her instinct kicked in. No panic, no hesitation. She bundled the triplets in coats, wrapped Evie in a thick blanket, and flagged down a rideshare in the pouring rain. Her heart pounded in her ears with every traffic delay and red light. She whispered reassurances to Evie between silent prayers, holding her close as if proximity alone could heal a fever. By the time they arrived at the hospital, Evie's breathing had grown labored. Inside the emergency room, the sterile brightness amplified Lila's anxiety. Nurses buzzed around, voices clipped, words sharp with urgency. Lila answered questions mechanically, date of birth, allergy history, when the fever started, but her eyes never left her daughter's pale, flushed face. Then came the moment that made her knees buckle. A sudden dip in Evie's oxygen level. The nurse moved quickly. Another staffer called for a respiratory consult. Lila stood frozen as monitors beeped, blinking in rapid succession. Then, a calm voice cut through the chaos like a warm hand to the shoulder. "Let me help." A man stepped forward, not in scrubs, not wearing a stethoscope. He wasn't part of the hospital staff, but he spoke with a certainty that made others listen. Tall, clean-cut, and exuding quiet confidence, he gestured to the attending physician and calmly asked questions that showed he understood more than the average visitor. He didn't just watch, he coordinated, suggested options, eased tensions. Lila looked at him through tears, confused but grateful. "Who are you?" she asked. The man turned to her, his voice steady. "Julian Hart. I'm on the board here, but more importantly, I'm a father." Evie had stabilized. The fever was responding to treatment. Lila sat on a bench in the waiting lounge, arms wrapped around Max and Isla, both fast asleep against her chest. Julian approached slowly, respectful of her space. He offered a paper cup of tea and a gentle smile. "You did everything right," he said. Lila shook her head. "I couldn't even afford a proper pediatrician." Julian's gaze was kind, but not pitying. "That doesn't make you any less of a mother. I saw how you held her. I saw how you ran in here like the world depended on it. That's what being a parent looks like." She took the tea, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to help." Julian shrugged, then sat beside her. "Some things don't need to be explained. Sometimes we just show up." His words settled into her like warmth after cold. She didn't ask why he had helped. She didn't ask what his job really was or what board he chaired. It didn't matter. What mattered was that in her moment of helplessness, someone had cared without asking for anything in return. Later that evening, Evie had been admitted overnight for observation. Lila tucked Isla and Max into the hospital-provided crib and settled into the corner armchair. Her back ached. Her eyes were heavy. She was just about to drift off when she noticed something new on the nightstand. A single white gardenia. Beside it, a neatly folded note. In every dark moment, a light finds a way. Her heart clenched. She looked around the room, but Julian was nowhere in sight. Just a quiet nurse checking vitals across the hall, and the hum of machines keeping rhythm with her thoughts. It wasn't just the flower. It was the fact that he had remembered. Evie was improving, her color returning. Max babbled happily as Lila spooned oatmeal into Isla's mouth. Just as she finished, a soft knock came on the door. Julian. No suit today. Just jeans, a navy sweater, and a paper bag with 3 cups of fresh coffee and a small tin of buttered rolls. "I figured you hadn't eaten," he said, stepping inside. "I remember what it's like, those first few years. All chaos, all love." Lila offered a tired smile. "You didn't have to do this." He shrugged again. "I know. That's why I did." They shared breakfast quietly, the morning sun casting soft rays through the hospital window. As Evie reached for Julian's finger with her tiny hand, he smiled and whispered, "She's strong. Like her mother." The hospital released Evie just after noon. Before they left, the billing administrator approached Lila with a calm expression. "Some charges have been taken care of by a private donor," she said. "You're cleared." Lila stared at the woman in disbelief. "Who?" The administrator shook her head. "He didn't leave a name, just a note." She handed Lila the slip of paper. "You're not alone. Keep painting. Keep loving. The world needs you." Lila pressed the note to her chest, her throat tightening. She didn't have answers, but she had hope. Back home, after the triplets were fed and asleep, Lila stood by her easel again. The painting she had started, an unfinished sun over darkened rooftops, suddenly begged for new colors. Bold yellows, blushing reds, maybe even a streak of gold. She added one stroke, then another, and then, with a trembling but steady hand, she painted a single white flower near the horizon. Not large, not dramatic, just present, a quiet promise that light had found her, and she had chosen to let it in. Weeks passed. Evie fully recovered, the fever just a memory now, and Lila's days resumed their predictable rhythm, feeding, painting, lullabies, and deep, unrelenting exhaustion. But amidst it all, something new had entered her world. Julian. He didn't barge in or make grand gestures. Instead, he showed up in the spaces where silence lived. A knock at the door with a bag of groceries. A call to check if the triplets needed warm clothes as the season shifted. A brief visit to admire her new painting, always with kind eyes and never an agenda. He never asked personal questions, never pushed, and that, more than anything, made Lila begin to lower her guard. One sunny afternoon, the apartment was quieter than usual, the triplets napping in a tangled heap of soft blankets. Lila stood on the balcony with a mug of lukewarm tea in hand, squinting at a canvas that had long sat unfinished. She was just about to return inside when a familiar voice called up from below. "Need help moving those canvases?" She leaned over the rail and smiled faintly. Julian stood beside his parked car, sleeves rolled up, a casual jacket draped over his shoulder. A part of her hesitated. This was her sanctuary, her space, but then she nodded. "Yeah, I could use a hand." Inside, Julian stepped lightly, careful not to disturb the babies or the scattered toys on the rug. His gaze drifted across the room, not with judgment, but quiet appreciation. "You've turned this into something beautiful," he said, gently moving a stack of art supplies off a chair. "It feels alive." Lila chuckled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "That's one way to describe it. Others might call it chaotic. Chaos can be meaningful." She looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. They spent the next hour moving canvases, reorganizing brushes, and sweeping dried petals from the floor. When they finished, Julian pulled 2 mismatched mugs from the cupboard and filled them with tea. They sat on the balcony, knees almost touching, the soft hum of the city below acting as their only soundtrack. Julian stared at the skyline, thoughtful. "You know," he began, "I spent years thinking I had to build everything alone. My company, my image, my future. But it all started to feel empty." Lila stirred her tea. "What changed?" He exhaled slowly. "I lost my sister 3 years ago. She was my anchor. After she passed, I realized I had all this success, but no one to share it with. I'd built a tower but forgot the windows. Lila said nothing at first, but her gaze softened. She knew that kind of emptiness. Not the kind that came from absence, but the kind that came from building something with someone, only to have them walk away without warning. She took a sip, then looked at him. I thought I knew love. Grant, my ex, he was charismatic, charming, but when things got hard, he vanished. Like the whole relationship had been a performance. Julian's brows furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. It took me a long time to realize, Lila continued, that love isn't loud promises or big gestures. It's showing up, quietly, every day. Julian looked at her then, really looked. And something passed between them, fragile and unspoken. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something honest. Max was the first to stir, then Isla, then Evie with her sleepy smile. Julian helped Lila set out snacks, instinctively kneeling to pick up toys and handing Isla her favorite bunny without being asked. The children took to him easily. Evie reached for his lap. Max offered him a cookie with his tiny fingers. Isla pulled on his sleeve with a shy grin. They like you, Lila said, folding laundry with one hand and holding a bottle in the other. Julian's eyes crinkled. Well, I'm honored. That's not easy to earn. They don't trust quickly, she said, then paused. Neither do I. He nodded once, letting the silence settle. I don't want anything from you, Lila, he said softly. I just enjoy being around you. And them. After Julian left, Lila stood in the doorway, arms crossed, heart a mess of conflict. She trusted herself less than she trusted him. Her mind screamed caution, but her heart was beginning to whisper. She turned to her easel, unfinished strokes waiting. For the first time, she painted not from pain, but from curiosity, from something budding. She painted a window, wide open, facing east. Hours later, Lila tucked the children into bed. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the radiator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed. For once, she wasn't planning, or surviving. She was just being. And in that stillness, she realized something simple but powerful. Healing didn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it showed up in the form of tea on a balcony, a helping hand, a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. The park buzzed with life that Saturday. Families gathered for weekend picnics, children darted between trees, and the scent of roasted corn wafted through the warm afternoon air. Lila sat on a bench beneath a wide oak, her gaze trailing the triplets as they giggled under the watchful eye of Mrs. Patel, her neighbor and part-time babysitter. Julian stood nearby, speaking with an artist setting up a booth for the local craft fair. He had invited Lila to showcase her paintings, and though she declined, she appreciated the thought. Her heart had begun to loosen its grip on fear, one gentle gesture at a time. She had just reached for her sketch pad when a shadow blocked the sun. A voice followed, smooth, familiar, and unwelcome. Well, you look different. Lila froze. She knew that voice. Her pulse quickened, a bitter taste rising in her throat. Slowly, she turned. There he was, Grant. His suit, though pressed and clean, hung awkwardly, like it had been borrowed. His smile was too polished, his eyes flicking toward the children before settling back on her with an intensity that made her stomach churn. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice level, though her hand clenched the pencil tightly. I heard you were here, he said, shrugging. Thought I'd see for myself. Thought maybe we could talk. She rose to her feet. There's nothing to talk about. I made mistakes, Lila. I panicked. No. Her voice hardened. You made a decision. You left. The night before I gave birth to your children. His smile faltered. I didn't know how to handle it, he said. Triplets? I wasn't ready. They didn't need you to be ready. They needed you to show up. Little Max toddled up first, a leaf in one hand and a juice pouch in the other. Isla followed close behind, her tiny shoes scuffed from running in the grass. Evie lingered further back, her eyes locked on the strangers speaking to their mother. Grant's face changed. His eyes softened, perhaps out of guilt or calculation. They're beautiful, he said. Ours. Lila stepped protectively in front of Max. You don't get to say that, she whispered. You forfeited that right. Grant shoved his hands in his pockets, lips twitching in frustration. Look, I'm not here to fight. I've been thinking. I want to be part of their lives. I can help now. I have a steady job. I can offer support. Lila crossed her arms. You want to play father because your life feels empty now? Because you're broke and you need something to hold on to? His nostrils flared. That's not fair. No, she interrupted. What's not fair is disappearing when your pregnant wife needed you most, only to return with apologies when the hard part is over. Julian arrived then, his steps unhurried but direct. He said nothing at first, only placed a comforting hand at the small of Lila's back. His presence alone shifted the energy. Solid, unshakable. Grant's eyes narrowed. And who's this? Julian didn't blink. Someone who's been here since the moment you disappeared. There was no aggression in his voice, just fact. Grant scoffed. So you've replaced me? Lila didn't flinch. You can't replace someone who chose to vanish. Grant stepped closer, but Julian calmly moved between them. This isn't the place, Julian said evenly. And this isn't your decision anymore. The tension was thick. Parents nearby turned subtly, pretending not to watch. Grant adjusted his collar. We'll talk again. This isn't over. Lila's reply was steel. It is for me. Grant's gaze lingered on the children, his children, then drifted to Lila, and finally to Julian, who met it without blinking. Then, Grant walked away. Later that evening, Lila paced the kitchen while Julian fed Isla in the living room. Her mind raced, a storm of emotions she couldn't yet name. Anger, fear, sadness, guilt. Julian watched her silently, then said, You handled that with more strength than most people could manage. She gave a bitter laugh. I felt like I was going to collapse. But you didn't. She met his gaze. I don't know what happens next. What if he comes back? What if he pushes for custody? I can't let him undo everything I've rebuilt. Julian stood, setting the bottle aside. He crossed the room and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He doesn't get to define what comes next. You do. Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. I'm scared. I know. That's why I'm staying. The triplets had drifted off to sleep. Lila sat on the edge of her bed, turning Grant's reappearance over in her mind like a jagged stone. Then her gaze caught the white gardenia, now pressed between the pages of her journal, dried but pristine. She touched its edges and breathed deeply. She was no longer the woman who had waited for a husband who never came back. She was a mother, an artist, a survivor, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could let love back in. Outside, the city lights flickered, and inside, Lila walked to her easel. This time, she didn't paint a storm. She painted 3 children playing under a tree. She painted a woman standing nearby, watchful, proud, and next to her, a man. Still, steady, quietly present. The wind howled against the windows as dusk settled across the city. Inside the apartment, the silence was heavier than usual. The triplets were asleep, 3 tiny heartbeats wrapped in blankets, unaware of the storm gathering in their mother's soul. Lila stood in her studio corner, staring at a blank canvas. She had been there for nearly 20 minutes. Brush in hand, no movement. Her mind kept returning to Grant's eyes. Not the man himself. She had long buried the illusion of who he was. But the expression he wore, hollow, uncertain, watching from a place he no longer belonged. What did he want now? Why now? And why, after all this time, did her heart still react as if the past held power? Behind her, Julian moved quietly, gathering stray toys from the living room floor. He never asked questions, never pushed. But tonight, his eyes lingered longer. He could feel her tension, like the air before a thunderclap. You've barely touched your tea, he said gently. Lila turned, the brush still untouched in her fingers. I can't paint tonight. I don't even know what I'm feeling. Julian gave a small nod. You don't need to explain anything, but you don't have to hold it all alone either. She didn't reply. Instead, she set the brush down, sat on the arm of the couch, and exhaled deeply. He shook something loose in me, not because I want him back, I don't, but because he reminded me of how easily I trusted him once, how easily I got it wrong. Julian sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. Pain doesn't mean you failed, it means you cared, it means you tried. The next morning, a gray sky cast dim light through the windows as Lila opened an envelope slipped beneath her door. No return address. Inside was a letter. Grant's handwriting. Lila, I know I have no right, but I miss them. I want to be part of their lives. Please let me try. Grant. She read it twice, then folded it and slid it into a drawer without a word. That afternoon, she joined Julian at his office downtown, not as a visitor, but as a collaborator. He had offered her an art commission, a mural for the entrance hall of his headquarters. The theme was renewal, a concept she knew too well. Lila stood before the expansive wall space, hands dusted with chalk, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled. The blankness before her no longer intimidated her, it invited her. As she sketched, Julian watched from a distance, giving her space. And slowly, the design took shape, vibrant strokes weaving from darkness into light, bursts of color breaking through gray. It wasn't just a painting, it was her healing process on full display. Days passed, each one subtly different from the last. Lila and Julian worked side by side. Coffee breaks turned into shared glances. Lunches became miniature therapy sessions. One afternoon, while rinsing brushes in the sink, Julian asked softly, "Do you ever wonder if it's okay to be happy again?" She looked up. All the time. He dried his hands, leaning against the counter. "I ask because, being with you and the kids, it feels like something I want to protect. But I'd never want to be someone you had to recover from." Lila stared at him for a long moment. "You're not," she whispered. "You're someone I didn't expect, but someone I now hope doesn't leave." A week later, another letter arrived, this time from Grant's lawyer. A request for supervised visitation, no demands, no custody filing. Just a formal attempt to re-enter their lives. Lila felt the weight of the paper in her hands. She didn't want the children growing up wondering, but she also couldn't allow confusion or chaos to return. So she made a choice. She drafted a reply, firm, clear, compassionate. "You may visit under the terms I set, and only if your presence proves consistent and safe. This is about their peace, not your redemption." She dropped the letter in the mailbox and walked home in the golden afternoon light, breathing easier for the first time in days. That evening, the triplets danced barefoot across the living room as soft music played. Julian sat cross-legged with Max on his lap, gently bobbing him to the rhythm, while Lila sketched Evie and Isla mid-spin, tiny hands flung wide, their laughter echoing off the walls. She glanced at Julian. He caught her gaze and mouthed, "You okay?" And for once, she was. Not because everything had been fixed, but because she had chosen what to let in and what to keep out. The gallery buzzed with low conversation and the scent of fresh flowers. Walls adorned with vivid strokes of sunrise, silhouettes of mothers with outstretched arms and children drawn in soft pastels, bore Lila's signature in the corner, bold and unapologetic. It was her first exhibition, a modest space nestled between a bookstore and a local bakery, but to Lila, it was sacred ground. Every canvas whispered a chapter of her journey. Every piece, a scar turned into something worthy of framing. Julian stood quietly by the refreshment table, speaking to a local journalist who had asked about the woman behind the exhibit. But his eyes always returned to Lila. She floated between guests with practiced poise, accepting compliments, explaining inspirations, pausing every few minutes to check on the triplets seated near the reading nook with Mrs. Patel. Their laughter gave her the courage to keep speaking. She hadn't expected the turnout to be this large. Word of her mural at Julian's headquarters had spread. People were curious. They came not just for the art, but for the story. The woman who raised 3 children alone, who turned pain into portraits, who had been left but never lost. She was no longer anonymous. She was becoming seen. Near the back of the gallery, just as she was thanking a young couple for their purchase, a figure stepped through the entrance. Grant. He wasn't dressed for the occasion. His eyes darted around as if unsure whether he belonged. And for good reason, he didn't. Julian saw him too. He moved closer, standing near but not intervening. Lila approached Grant slowly. "You're not supposed to be here," she said evenly. "I saw the flyers," he replied. "Thought I'd congratulate you." She nodded once. "Thank you. Now please go." "I'm trying, Lila. I've been showing up to the supervised visits. I haven't missed one. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts," she said, as effort, not entitlement. His face tightened. "I'm not here to fight," he said more quietly. "I just wanted to see what you've built." She hesitated, then gestured toward a painting hung near the gallery's front. A soft-toned canvas of a woman standing at a window, sunlight streaming in, holding 3 children beneath a sky beginning to heal. "That one," she said, "was painted on the day I decided I no longer needed you." His gaze lingered on the image. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Moments later, he turned and left, quietly, without further words. This time, Lila didn't tremble. That evening, back home, the children fast asleep and the lights dimmed, Lila sat beside Julian on the couch. Her head rested on his shoulder, their fingers lightly intertwined. "You didn't say anything when he showed up," she whispered. "I didn't need to," Julian replied. "You had it handled." She lifted her eyes to him. "You always let me lead." He gave a small smile. "Because you're not someone who needs saving, just someone worth standing beside." Her breath caught, not from fear, from recognition. This was what real support looked like, not flashy promises or poetic apologies. Just presence, just patience, and maybe love. 1 month later, the mural at Julian's company was unveiled during a private event. Journalists snapped photos, employees clapped, and donors praised the vision behind the artwork. But for Lila, it wasn't about the applause. It was about the moment she stood in front of her own creation, the triplets at her side, Julian's hand resting lightly on her back, and felt whole, not defined by struggle, not surviving in fragments, but whole. A crisp autumn evening, Lila arrived home to find the apartment filled with warm candlelight and the scent of vanilla. On the wall hung a new painting, one she hadn't made. It depicted a quiet scene, a man kneeling in a small garden, a ring in hand, 3 children hiding behind a bush, peeking with glee, a woman watching, caught in a moment of wonder. Lila turned. Julian stood behind her, his expression gentle and unsure for the first time. "I know we've walked through a lot," he began, "and I know your heart is a sacred place, but if you'll have me, if you'll let me, I'd be honored to spend the rest of my life honoring that heart." He opened the velvet box. The ring was simple, elegant, unmistakably real. Tears slipped down Lila's cheeks, but her voice was steady. "I don't want a fairy tale," she said. Julian's voice was soft. "Neither do I." She reached for his hand. "I want a life, with the joy, the pain, the quiet mornings, the long nights, with all of it. And with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. And in that moment, Lila broke free, not from Grant, not from grief, but from the belief that she was only what she had survived. She had become who she chose to be. The ring sparkled faintly in the moonlight. Lila lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the gentle rise and fall of her chest barely moving the sheet draped over her. The soft hum of the city outside barely registered. The weight of Julian's proposal still clung to her, not in fear, but in magnitude. He had asked her to build a life, not to forget the past, not to erase it, but to stand beside him and live fully in spite of it. And now, in the quiet stillness of night, she found herself wrestling with ghosts she thought she'd already buried. Her mind wandered to the night Grant left, the coldness of his message, the ache of going through childbirth with no one's hand to hold, the hours of isolation, the judgmental stares, the neighbors who once smiled, now whispering behind curtains. The tears she hadn't let fall that night now found their way down her cheeks. Julian was nothing like him. But what if life turned again? What if the comfort she'd found was just temporary? She rolled onto her side, curling into herself as if the posture might shield her from fate's cruelty. The bedroom door creaked open. Julian stepped inside, barefoot, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. "You okay?" he asked softly, crossing to her side of the bed. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not about you. It's not doubt. It's memory, fear." Julian knelt, resting his chin gently on the edge of the mattress. "I get it." She turned to face him, her eyes red. "I'm scared of trusting happiness, of letting myself believe this will last." He reached for her hand. "Then let's not rush it. Let's build it. One morning, one mess, one miracle at a time." The next morning, Lila awoke not to fear, but to laughter. Evie and Isla had climbed into bed beside her, giggling over Julian's dramatic pancake flip in the kitchen. Max was sitting proudly at the table, face smudged with syrup, wearing one of Julian's neckties like a superhero cape. Lila watched the scene unfold from the hallway, unseen, and in that messy, beautiful moment, her doubts began to fade. Later that day, after the triplets were at daycare and the apartment quiet, Lila asked Julian to sit with her on the balcony. "I've decided," she said, fingers laced tightly in her lap. "Yes." "To everything." He blinked. "To the engagement?" She nodded. "To the marriage, to the risk, to the life. But on one condition, anything." She held up one finger. "No pretending, no masks. We're not building a perfect story. We're building a real one." Julian smiled gently. "That's all I've ever wanted." They sat in silence, letting the wind thread itself between them. Just as peace began to settle, another letter arrived. This time, it wasn't from Grant directly, but from his new lawyer. He wanted a formal custody hearing, not supervised visitation, not phone calls. Custody. Lila stood at the kitchen table, reading the paper 3 times before sitting down, heart pounding. Not because she feared losing the children, she knew she never would, but because it reminded her of how power tries to reassert itself. Julian sat across from her. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask what she needed. He simply said, "We fight this together." The courtroom was cold and clinical. Grant sat on the opposite bench, dressed sharply but fidgeting. His lawyer made passionate claims about redemption, about a man who had changed, about children needing their father. But Lila's lawyer was calm, clear, prepared. She presented records of Grant's absence, of the missed years, of the voluntary abandonment. Julian took the stand briefly, not as a replacement parent, but as a character witness to Lila's unwavering dedication, her sleepless nights, her consistent love. Lila spoke last. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply said, "I gave them life. He gave them absence. I am their mother in every hour, in every heartbeat." The judge ruled swiftly, no custody. Supervised visits would remain, under a schedule chosen by Lila. Grant's shoulders slumped. He nodded quietly. There was no dramatic outburst, just a quiet realization that consequences had arrived. Finally, outside the courtroom, Lila let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Julian wrapped his coat around her shoulders and kissed the top of her head. "You never needed me to fight for you," he whispered. "But I'll always be standing beside you when you do." That night, Lila journaled for the first time in weeks. She wrote not about fear or betrayal, but about strength, about the long night that tried to steal her light, and how morning still came anyway. Her last sentence read, "I am not afraid of love anymore. I am afraid of not living fully enough to honor it." The backyard was small, modest, uneven in places, but in the golden breath of late afternoon, it shimmered like a secret garden. Lila spread a checkered blanket beneath the lone cherry tree, setting down a basket of sandwiches and a pitcher of juice. The triplets ran barefoot through the grass, their giggles rising like birdsong. Max held up a dandelion to Lila, who blew on it with all the determination of a child making the world listen. Julian stepped out of the house, a stack of picture books in one hand, a soft smile on his face. He looked over at Lila. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, brushing a curl from her face. "More than I thought I ever could be." It had been 3 months since the court ruling. Grant had kept his supervised visitation schedule, punctual, restrained, distant. He made no further attempts at disruption. And in that quiet compliance, Lila found closure, not because he had changed, but because she no longer needed his validation. Her life no longer orbited around what he did or didn't do. She had redrawn her world, and this time she was at the center. The art gallery thrived. Her mural was now featured in a city-wide publication about local creatives reshaping the future. And every week, more commissions came in. Portraits of women reclaiming themselves, of families rising from fractures. But the truest masterpiece she had was here, beneath this tree, in the form of messy hands, wide grins, and a man who had never asked her to be anything more than herself. Julian didn't propose again. He didn't need to. One evening, while folding laundry together, Lila simply said, "Let's do it." And he smiled. Tomorrow? They married in a small civil ceremony, with the triplets as their witnesses and Mrs. Patel wiping away tears from the back row. There were no flower arches, no long aisle, no orchestra, just a handwritten vow, a soft kiss, and the knowledge that the love they were choosing was steady, kind, and deserved. Weeks later, Lila found herself sorting through old boxes. At the bottom of one, she discovered a journal from her first year with Grant, tucked away, untouched. She opened it. Flipping past the pages filled with dreams they'd once scribbled in tandem, she paused at a note she'd written during her pregnancy. "If I survive this, I promise to never let fear build my future." She smiled softly, then tore the page free. Later she burned it in the kitchen sink, watching the paper curl and vanish in smoke, not out of anger, but gratitude. Because that version of her, the one who wrote that promise, had kept it. Spring arrived early that year. One morning, as Lila walked the edge of the yard, she noticed something nestled near the base of the cherry tree. A white gardenia. She knelt, breath caught in her throat. It wasn't from a florist. It had grown. No one had planted it. Yet here it was. She gently touched its petals, remembering the one that first appeared in her hospital room all those months ago. A silent message then. A quiet miracle now. It was more than coincidence. It was continuity. That evening, with the triplets gathered close and Julian reading aloud from a storybook, Lila looked into their sleepy eyes and made a silent vow. They would grow up knowing strength wasn't loud, it was in showing up. They would learn that love wasn't perfect, it was a choice, repeated in ordinary moments. And they would understand that their mother didn't just survive, she became. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops and twilight painted the sky with soft strokes of lavender and gold, Lila stood by the window of her new home. The ring on her finger caught the last of the fading light. The triplets' laughter echoed in the hall. Julian called her name, just once, gently, and she turned, not out of fear, but with a heart wide open. She no longer waited for life to hurt less. She welcomed it for all that it was, because Lila Monroe had rewritten her story, not with fairy tales, but with truth, courage, and one impossible bloom that refused to die. Have you ever started over, not from nothing but from everything that nearly broke you? If Lila's journey reminds you of your own, share your story below. Let your voice be a spark for someone else. And if this story made you feel something, joy, hope, strength, click like, share with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings, and subscribe to Love in Twilights. Here, every story is a reminder that love isn't lost. It's just waiting for the right time to bloom.